everyone, and welcome to the Next Best Picture podcast, where I am being joined right now by the Academy Award-winning documentary filmmaker Asif Kapadia to talk about 2073. Asif, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Really good. Nice to be talking to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here and for talking to me about this um, terrifying film. Why'd you got to go do that? Why'd you got to go scare the ever-living crap out of all of us like this?
I'm just like representing what's going on in the world, man.
I
It
hear
really,
you.
it's one of those, I started making this film, actually physically making it 4 years ago
Hmm.
and thinking about it even longer, maybe started thinking about it in 2015, 16, just from what I was seeing, witnessing happening around the world and in my country. I live in the UK, I live in London.
Yeah.
And, films take a long time. My films take me 4 or 5 years on average, always. And so when you're making something, a lot of the time you're like, people were saying, why are you doing this? Why? Everything's great, everything's fine. And I just had a feeling. It was a film that came out of a feeling of what was going on around the world and how so many countries seem to be getting in sync. And then, yeah, the idea of making a documentary which, is sort of set in the future. That's the idea,
Hmm.
that it's like a sci-fi doc, but also secretly underneath the surface, it's a horror doc. It's like
Yeah.
a really scary film, but the scariest elements and all of the kind of action moments or the most kind of epic moments, they're all factual. They're
Hmm.
all using archive and essentially representing the last 10 years of what's happening around the world.
Yeah, and when we start to like really drill in on what exactly is happening all around the world, I mean, it's everything you realize is connected, right? The rise of social media, the weaponization of social media, actually, I'll say, and then how that also kind of feeds into our election of political leaders and then their decisions to not protect citizens' rights, the environment, so on and so forth. And we're just like on this death spiral. For you, what was the event in 2015, 2016 that really perked your eyes and ears to go, something's going on here?
So for me, it started with Brexit happening in the UK. There was this
Yeah.
idea that there was outside interference, there was foreign money, there were people who want to break up the European Union, and they came along and they said the best thing for you would be if leave Europe and you're free of all of these, there's a lot of racism that was in there, and you'll be richer if you leave this market. And so people were lied to, they voted for something, and their lives have got worse, right? They got
Yeah.
people to vote for something that made them poorer, made their lives worse. And the people who suffer the most were the people who voted for it. People who live in the big cities, like in London, our lives haven't necessarily changed that much, but we're definitely now second-class citizens. And so much of when we need to travel to Europe, our children can't study in Europe. A lot of the things that we had, people have lost. And it's
Mm.
not until you lose it, you realize, oh, maybe I made a mistake. Now, we had that referendum in 2016, and it's not like an election where you can just vote and you're back in. We're going to be
Hmm.
out for a long time. So it started with that, and then happened to be here in the US and working on a TV show for David Fincher, Mindhunter, in Pittsburgh during the 2016 election here. And I really noticed the language was exactly the same as the campaign in the UK. It was
Yeah.
literally like copy and paste campaign. We were the petri dish, and then it happened in the US, right?
Hmm.
Then, because my family are from India, I was aware of populist leader Modi had taken over in India. And the more he divided people, the more, in this case, religious tension there was, the more popular he became.
Hmm.
I've worked in Brazil when I made Senna, and I could see it happening in Brazil where they wanted a dictator to come back. They'd had a military dictatorship up until the 80s. And
Yeah.
their young people were being tricked into thinking the solution will be a dictator. That's how you get rid of crime. So I just saw it happening in loads of places. And I just thought, am I going crazy? Or it's the same thing happening everywhere. And I hadn't at that point read any articles or any books about it. And I just thought something's going on. I could see it. And I thought, okay, one day I'll make a film about this. I don't know how I'll do it, but I'll do it. And then, yeah, that's really where 2073 began as a thought. And then it became a reality during COVID because we're all locked in, we're all stuck at home. And I thought, right now, my heroes are not sports people, they're not musicians, they're journalists, really
Yeah.
good journalists who are holding power to account around the world, who are being attacked for doing their jobs, killed for doing their jobs, being imprisoned or lawfare is being used against them. So I thought during lockdown, what I'll do, I'll just contact journalists everywhere and say, look, I don't know what this film is. I don't know if it'll ever be a film, but will you speak to me and just tell me about you and your circumstances in your country? What is going on? And once I got through to them, people spoke to me because they were locked down, not locked away. Um, and they spoke to me, and every story felt like it was identical. And
Mm-hmm.
I just thought, this is crazy. And I said, well, why does it feel like it's happening in your country? And everyone kept coming back to social media technology. Everyone's got the same tech. All of these leaders are using the same playbook, and they're literally copying what other people have done in their countries and saying, well, we'll do that too. People in the West maybe thought, well, it's not going to happen to us. That's what happens in Africa, happens in
Yeah.
Latin America, it happens in Asia, and then it happened in Eastern Europe, it's happened in Russia, it's happened in Western Europe, it happened in the US, it's happening everywhere. And it's the same tricks, same playbook, and it's happening at the same time. And one of the journalists said to me, it's like all of these populist leaders are on a WhatsApp group together saying, what did you do? I go, I just did this and it worked. I go, I'll try that. It felt like that. And
I
that all
watched
came out just an instinctive feeling. And then
mhm.
the journalists confirmed it. And so through those journalists, I thought, let me somehow try and turn this into a movie. But also the really important thing, it's about tech, it's about the breakdown of democracy and the takeover by populist leaders. But it's also importantly about, if you're worried about the climate, if you're worried about freedom of expression, if you're worried about journalism, all of these things, surveillance, they are all connected. And I wanted to make a film that connected all of these dots so that people could understand. If you worry about one thing, you have to understand this other thing happening on the other side of the world, because
Mhm.
whatever's happening there will affect you soon enough.
Yeah, I felt that recently when I watched the documentary Apocalypse in the Tropics, which is about recent political changes in Brazil and the parallels to what I see happening here in the States is eerie to the point where you're right. This is not just a U.S. problem. And I think the quicker that anyone, wherever they are in the world, whether it's England or whether it's here in the States, wakes up to the fact that this is happening all over the world, this is indicative of a much grander problem for humanity as a whole. And I do believe that hopefully my optimistic side is saying if we could recognize that this is a global issue, and I believe firmly that we can hopefully then all come together to overcome it versus being split apart. But
It's exactly,
you got to
Matt,
be
that's
unified
exactly the
against a common
purpose.
goal.
Matt, that's exactly the purpose, isn't it, of social media? And
Hmm.
the idea is for you to be alone on a device, arguing with someone that may not even be real, or arguing with
Yeah.
someone that doesn't know you. And my theory was always like, collectively, we haven't got more money than them, right? We're talking about the richest people in the world own a
Yes.
lot of the tech companies. They own the social media apps. They are now in government in your country. And so you're not going to beat them with money. You can't raise more money, right? You're going to have
Yeah.
to do it the way, and it has to be the collective. It has to be the old-fashioned way of people coming together. My instinct with this film was always for it to be a movie, for a film, in a big screen, in the dark, people sit next to each other, and then at the end, people start talking to one another, saying, "What do we do here in our community? What do we do collectively? What can we change on a personal level?" Within your own family and your friends, and then kind of like community, and then kind of bigger, and then also to understand globally, someone else's problem on the other side of the world is your problem. It is your problem. You can't keep saying, not my issue, I just get on my thing. They probably deserve it. And then it happens
Yeah.
to you, and you're like, shit, right. So who's going to help us now? So you're right. We've got to use this as a way to somehow change the systems that we have at present because it's not working. It's not working for us. It's working for certain people really well.
Yeah. Well, that's the way it works, right? As long as those people remain at the top, screw everybody else, basically.
Yeah. And what can we
Speak,
do?
yeah,
All I know is to make movies, right? So you've got to make a movie that somehow puts it all together. I spend the hard work 5 years making something in a very digestible form. Like it's a tight movie. It's 85 minutes, but I did want it to be quite hard hitting and a bit of a punch in the gut for people to see it and then to think. And in my dream was always like you walk out of the movie or you watch the film and then you just start seeing the world slightly differently. And some of those dots that you had, but you didn't really understand, we've tried to connect them up. And the names that keep popping up on the news or in TV, or you see them online, and you go, well, who is that guy? You go, okay, keep an eye on that person because they basically are very influential, but they're not elected, right? The laws are out of date. And these people have extreme power, but they don't even need to be elected. They just fund certain people who then are the front. And, you know, the danger with all of this is it just sounds like you're some crazy conspiracy nut. But that's why I started with really good journalists and journalism, and everything that we kind of is factual, right? And there's a lot more that's going on which we can't even keep up with. That's one of our challenges. So much is happening so fast you can't keep up. The laws are out of date, the news is out of date, and our information, you know, you're just trying to keep up and you're trying to do your own job, live your life, survive, not go crazy. And I
Right.
think that that's a real challenge. That's the kind of intention, I think, of people, but also that's our challenge to sort of survive this.
Yeah. Um, I can understand why you chose to use documentary and also like narrative feature filmmaking, blending the two together here, right? Because you want to be able to comment on our present truthfully in an honest manner, but also you got to tell this sci-fi story of the perspective being told in 2073 and a warning from the future, if you will. But I'm curious to know, 2073. What's the math? How did you arrive at that year? Why not 2072,
I mean, you
2053?
know, it is basically next week, isn't it? Or last week. But the just partly it was like graphically I liked the number. And then there was an element of like my kids are going to be a certain age at that point. What is the world going to look like? So I wanted it to not be like, you know, the year 4000. I wanted it to be close enough, but also, that's kind of one of the tropes, I suppose. That's one of the things about sci-fi, 1984, 2001. They kind of have a number, you know, Back to the Future is set in, is it 87, right? It's set in a year. And then part of it is like, when we get there, what's the world look like? If we get there.
Yeah.
Um, in this case, I just got came a number, but it was always a sense of irony within that, which is it's always obviously about now, but all dystopian literature or movies, they kind of have a date that they aim for. I didn't want it to feel like even it's changed that much. It's not super duper kind of futuristic with everything flying around. It's actually a shitter version of now, right?
Mhm.
That's the thing. It's not going to be super slick, my feeling. My feeling is that it's going to be a lot of people are just going to end up living in tunnels and living underground. They're not going to be able to afford homes or houses. There's no schools, no university, there's no cinema, there's no libraries, there's no culture. You know, you're just surviving underground like rats while other people are living an incredible lifestyle because the divide between those who have and don't have is only going to get more and more extreme. So it was
Yeah.
a kind of a number that I just liked the look of, partly, but then also it was a number where, you know, our young people now will still be around. And the idea is for us to know that we haven't got there yet. So if we
Hmm.
start doing something now, because we can't worry about what happened already, but we can start doing something now to make sure we don't end up there because we're already there and we've got to change it. That was a kind of our intention. The other thing about having the drama element, my background originally is in fiction and in drama.
Sure.
My first few features were fiction films. So part of me wanted to kind of like go back there into that space. And the way this film was constructed, we researched and edited all of the doc sequences first because I wasn't sure how many there'd be. And they were really tough to watch on their own, right? And so I felt like I needed a breather for the audience because I knew there wasn't a central character. It wasn't about one country. It wasn't about one particular actor or populist leader or one theme, even. I wanted to throw it all in there. So for your brain to kind of digest what you've just seen, and then before we move on to the next one, we needed something. And that's where I thought the drama could work here. And then also, I didn't want a drama because the original screenplay was quite complex, to be so complicated that while you're still digesting a lot of thoughts and ideas in the doc sequence, your brain can't keep up if you have a very complicated drama. So I wanted to simplify that almost down to the equivalent of us going to work each day and just surviving the subway is the version of what Ghost in our film, Samantha Morton's character, is. What is existence in the future? You go there and you just look for things to live off of, and you share them out with your community. And you go back and if you're lucky, you find a book, a physical thing. All she's got are a few items. She lives in an old mall. They're all been shut down now because everything's gone to, you know, it can all be delivered to your door or not by some drone. And so the idea of just having a simple existence and the kind of big political act within the drama is two people meeting for a cup of tea
Mhm.
and having a conversation. You know, that is a big moment. You know, that's the kind of thing that we won't have because you'll be afraid who you're meeting or talking to. And the kind of idea of surveillance being everywhere, the idea of people being taken away and vanishing because they may have committed a crime. and what you don't even know whether you've committed a crime, but something you've done may become illegal in the future. That's the world we're heading into. So that was the idea, was to kind of balance the fiction and the non-fiction in a space. And I love experimenting with my films. My first feature film, The Warrior, was not in English, and it was a Western. And then with Senna, I played the idea, having never made a documentary before, I was like, can I make a documentary where I don't have any interviews? I don't have any talking heads. And then with this one, I thought, I don't know, I'm not sure if anyone's done a sci-fi doc set in the future before. Why don't we try something like, so it's also like there's the political element, there's the kind of research and journalism, but there's also the kind of creative test to myself and my crew, saying, we didn't have a lot of money to make this, right? With a normal documentary budget, can we also turn it into an epic sci-fi kind of feel?
Well, I certainly think that you blended the two pretty well here. And like you said, gave us a warning of what to be on the lookout for. I mean, I think a lot of people are definitely aware of many of this stuff, but at the same time, there's a numbness. There is a an acceptance, if you will. Oh, that's just the way the world is, and then we go about our daily lives and do nothing about it. So for your film to be able to reignite those feelings, bring them to the forefront, and say, no, we have to deal with this now. Otherwise, this is where we're heading. Obviously, the words vital, necessary, urgent. I hear those getting tossed around all the time, but this is one that I feel very strongly really earns those words. So I want to congratulate you on the film, and also too, Federer 12 Final Days. Awesome. Really enjoyed
Yeah.
that one as well. So
That's
you've been
the
busy.
opposite end of the universe, isn't it? But
I
it
know.
was simply about, well, that was interesting because that was a film about getting old, right?
Yeah.
I'm a filmmaker. Like, I'm still like learning. I'm a student and I'm in my 50s. And my heroes are making films in the 80s. And the idea that you have your career ends in your 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s if you're an athlete, I thought it's an interesting concept of how do you deal with that. So yeah.
Yeah.
Just imagine journalists, you have to retire at 35. What do you do?
I'm gonna be working until I'm in the ground, so it's all good for me. Thank you so much here, Asif. I really appreciate the time, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. Take care.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. Cheers. Bye.